There's an interesting passage in the Old Testament book of 1 Samuel. The Philistines are threatening to attack the Hebrews. And King Saul of the Hebrews is afraid of the Philistines, and he doesn't know what to do. He's scared to death they're going to attack, and he doesn't know what to do. And so he uses several different ways to try to figure out what he should do. And one of the things he consults is something called the Urim and Thummim. Now, if you're reading that passage in the book of 1 Samuel, you might be tempted to skip on by that because what in the world does that mean? And you might just go on and pay it no attention. But Urim and Thummim are mentioned a number of times in the Old Testament. What they are and what they were used for might be surprising. They are first mentioned in the book of Exodus in connection with the garments the high priest wore. The high priest wore an ephod, E-P-H-O-D, and that was made out of linen, and it was sort of like a short robe without sleeves. Now, I have seen women wear aprons that are similar to what an ephod looked like. They're about knee length and they come up to about here. They have straps around the shoulders and then it ties. It's sort of like a big apron. You might see somebody working in a restaurant a lot of times wearing something like that. Now, the high priest put this on first, and on top of that, he put the breastplate. Now, the breastplate was also made out of linen, and it had 2 layers. It was about 18 inches square. And on that breastplate were 4 rows of 3 gemstones each. And each square had a different gemstone on it. Now remember that the breastplate itself was made up of 2 layers of linen, and so that created a pouch in between the 2 layers. And inside that pouch, we are told, were the Urim and Thummim. Now, Exodus does not tell us what those were or what they were used for, just that they were there in that little pouch, in that breastplate. Remember, the breastplate was about 18 inches square. It was about like that. So from Exodus, we just know that they were put in the breastplate, and that's all. Now, we encounter them again in many other places in the Old Testament, and we get clues for what they were used for. We already talked about when Saul was trying to decide what to do with the Philistines, and he didn't know what to do, and it said he consulted the Urim and Thummim, and it doesn't tell us what they were or how they're used, but it does tell us that they gave him no answer. So Saul consulted them and got no answer. They also play a part in the book of Numbers. And you remember in the book of Numbers, Moses' life is coming to an end. He will soon die, and he asked God to appoint another leader for the Hebrews to lead them into the promised land after he dies. And God appoints a man named Joshua to succeed Moses. And God tells Moses that when Joshua is the leader, he will need to stand before the high priest and seek counsel from the Urim and Thummim, and they will guide Joshua in what he is to do. Now, the Urim and Thummim play a part in another account in the book of 1 Samuel, and this time Saul and his army are in battle against the Philistines, and they are having some victories. Saul is afraid, though, that if they stop and let up for the night, they'll lose their momentum, and the Philistines will be able to regroup. And so he tells the men they're going to fight all day and all night as long as it takes to defeat the Philistines. They're not even going to stop to eat. And so they do that, and they defeat the Philistines that day. And they go in and they see all the livestock the Philistines had. And remember, they've been fighting day and night and didn't even stop to eat, and they're about to starve to death. And it says they immediately go in there and kill the livestock and eat it containing blood. And that means that they either did not cook it or they did not cook it enough to get the blood out of it. According to Jewish law, you had to cook meat enough to get all the blood out of it. You could not eat meat with blood in it. These men don't do that. They're about to starve to death, and they just fly in there and they don't cook it enough and they eat it. And Saul finds out about this, that some of the men have eaten meat with blood, and he determines to find out who. The method he uses is the Urim and Thummim. Now, in that passage, that's in chapter 14, depending on what Bible translation you have, you may read that and never see that mentioned, because some of the Old Testaments are translated from a later Hebrew version instead of the earlier Greek version. The earlier Greek version has the Urim and Thummim. The later Hebrew translation does not. So if you're using an Old Testament that itself is a translation of the Hebrew translation, then you will not see that in there. But if you're going back to the original Septuagint, you will. In this case, the people were divided into two groups, and people were switched around from group to group, and the Urim and Thummim were used, and little by little it was ascertained who had eaten meat and who had not. But again, we do not have any clue about the exact procedure. Now, there are many other references to the Urim and Thummim in the Old Testament. Nowhere does it tell us exactly what they are or how they were used. Now, many biblical scholars believe that's the case because at the time when these things were written, everybody knew what they were and how they were used, so there would be no need to explain it. If you're writing a letter, let's say to somebody, and you're talking about your car, you don't have to explain to them what a car is because they already know. And so you just talk about the car without explaining what it is. But of course that leaves us today in the dark. Today nobody knows exactly what those were and what they were used for. Some people believe that since they were associated with the breastplate, and the breastplate was associated with stones, that they are stones. Other people theorize they're made of wood or bone. In the end, no one knows. No one knows how they were used. Some people say it was like you had, let's say you have two marbles in a bag, a black one and a white one, and you ask a question, you close your eyes and reach down there and pull a marble out. If it's white, the answer is yes. If it's black, no. Others say that since we are told several times when it's talked about in the Old Testament that people received no answer, there were three objects in the bag. One would be yes, one would be no, and one would be no answer. Others theorize that there are a whole group of objects, like a group of sticks or something, and you'd throw them down and you'd look at the pattern they made. One pattern was yes, one pattern was no. If it was neither of those patterns, then it was no answer. Still others have suggested that they were like dice, and that you would roll them, and the answer would come up depending on what side of the dice was facing upward. So we don't really know exactly what they were and how they were used, but it would be analogous to us today tossing a coin. And they were seen as a way that God communicates His will in a particular situation. You would ask a question like, should we go into battle against the Philistines? And the Urim and Thummim would either say yes, no, or give you no answer. And that answer was seen as coming from God. Now, I like 8 balls. I guess that's sort of weird, but I've always liked 8 balls, and my cousin gave me one for Christmas years ago. And you know, you can ask an 8-ball question, turn it over and see what it says. And then a couple of years later, she also gave me a yellow 8-ball with a smiley face on it. It's an affirmation ball. And you turn it over and it says, gee, you're great. Wow, you're wonderful, or something like that. So using the Urim and Thummim would be like using an 8-ball, flipping a coin, picking cards out of a deck, rolling the dice, or something like that. Now, we consider the results of stuff like that random, just by chance. But the Old Testament, in fact, the whole Bible sees it differently. In addition to the Urim and Thummim being approximately mentioned 70 times in the Old Testament as a means of making decisions, the Bible also talks a lot about casting lots. There are different ways to cast lots. The Bible doesn't specify a method. Sometimes you throw them down and see the pattern they make when they land. Another way of casting lots is by drawing straws to see who gets the longest or the shortest. And in our New Testament reading this morning, that's what we heard. We heard a passage where, remember, Judas betrayed Jesus. He was one of the 12 disciples, and Judas betrayed Jesus. And after Jesus ascended into heaven, Jesus had told the disciples to go through all the world preaching the gospel, and they needed to replace Judas and get the 12th man again. And we heard in our New Testament reading how they chose that 12th man. They drew lots, and the lot fell to a man named Matthias. The way the account states is that they prayed to God, that God would let the lots point to the right person, and then they cast the lots and it went to Matthias. And they interpreted that as God appointing Matthias. Casting lots, if you'll remember, plays a big role in the Old Testament book of Jonah. Remember, Jonah was the one swallowed up by a whale. God had told Jonah to go to Nineveh, and Jonah didn't want to go, so he got on a boat to go the other way. And a big storm came up. The sailors on the boat, they interpreted that storm as God getting mad at someone on that boat and trying to get even with someone on that boat, and so they cast lots. And the lot fell to Jonah. And remember, they threw Jonah overboard. The lot pointed out the right person. They threw Jonah overboard. The storm stopped, and they all were saved, and Jonah got swallowed up by the whale. Now there's many other examples. The land in the book of Numbers was divided up among the Hebrew families according to casting lots. That's how they divided up land, casting lots. Into the New Testament, we've already talked about how they chose the replacement for Judas and the 12 disciples by casting lots. There's also an account of casting lots in the Gospel of Luke. It says, remember, Zachariah and Elizabeth, these were the mother and father of John the Baptist. It tells us that Zachariah was a priest, and there were really too many priests in those days, and so it said that every day they would cast lots to see who would perform the duties of the priest that day. And so they would do that to choose the priest. Now, if we look in the Bible, we will see that generally in these instances, they ask God in some way to intervene before they do what they do, before they cast the lots, whatever that may be. They might throw down sticks, maybe they roll dice, they do the Urim and Thummim, they draw straws or whatever, but they pray to God beforehand and they say, God, let the result reflect your will. Then they do it, and then it is believed that that result reflects God's will. This idea of God controlling how the lots fall is expressed in Proverbs chapter 16. It says, the lot is cast into the lap, but the decision is of the Lord. Now, of course, today we believe that stuff like that is random. Their belief, though, was that God controls the outcome. The Urim and Thummim were just another way of casting lots. That's technically what that is, whatever they were. And there is a technical name for making decisions that way. It's called cleromancy. You might see that in the bulletin as the title of this sermon, cleromancy. Cleromancy is using some method, the result of which we may consider random, to make a decision. Rolling dice, casting lots, flipping a coin, using an 8-ball, using Urim and Thummim. Those are all examples of cleromancy. Now we might think those things give random results, like when you toss a coin, it's just random, heads or tails. But people who practice cleromancy believe it's not random. They believe the result is caused by some power in the spiritual realm. And of course, we as Christians would say that spiritual realm, the power in the spiritual realm is God. And so we see in the Bible these people practicing cleromancy, and they were assured in their own minds that God was the one providing the answer. Such practices were common in the ancient world, not only among the Hebrew people and the early Christians, but among many ancient people. It was believed that that's one way that spiritual powers and the gods make their will known. But you know, there's another reason why that was so popular. Think about a time in your life when you had to make a serious decision. Like maybe you're deciding whether to change jobs, or you're deciding where you want to build your house, or anything like that. A time in your life that you have to make a serious decision. I bet you really sweated and fretted and worried about it before you made that decision. I bet that you spent a lot of time weighing the alternatives, thinking one way or the other. And then when you made a decision, you thought, well, I think this is the right decision, but I don't know. But you sweated over it, you fretted over it. If you use something like this, it takes all the pressure off. You don't have to fret over it and worry about it. You don't have to wonder if you make the right decision. Just toss the coin and there it is, and you go on. And so that can take the pressure off of you from making decisions. That's one reason that's popular. There's also another reason it was so popular. And this may be actually the biggest reason it was so popular. Proverbs 18:18 says this, "The lot causes contentions to cease and keeps the mighty apart." In other words, casting lots is a way to make an impartial decision. You can't cheat it unless you have a weighted coin or something, but say you have fair stuff. Nobody can influence it one way or another. There's no ballot tampering involved. There's no election interference. The only influence on it is from God. And for that reason, you know, it helps to keep discord down. It keeps people from fighting among themselves over who to choose for a leader, fighting among themselves over what policy to follow, this, that, and the other. You don't fight about it. You just let the coin decide, and there's no fighting. It keeps people off of each other's throats, in other words. It keeps people from fighting among themselves. One will ask me, have you gone to the mailbox yet? Or when I go to the mailbox, one will say, what do we got in the mail? And you know, last few weeks I've come in with a handful of stuff every day. I wish I had the money that's been spent on all these political ads. These things are in color, and they're seen in the mail. Some of them are oversized. There is no telling how much money has been spent on those things. And one will say, what we got in the mail? I say, well, we got two things that told us that Tom Tillis wants older people to die. Two things that told us what a low-down person Cal Cunningham is. One thing that tells us how stupid Joe Biden is, and another thing that tells us how degenerate Donald Trump is, and another thing that tells us that Dan Forrest doesn't care if we die, and another that tells us that Roy Cooper's a cheat. So in other words, we get all these things in the mail every day telling us how low down and despicable every one of these people running for public office are, both parties. And you go to the polls, you say, well, I can't go to the polls and vote. They're nothing but a bunch of low-down idiots. All that could be avoided if we just cast lots, flipped a coin, or asked the 8-ball. You know, we look at stuff like that like the results are random. And it's hard for us to accept that people in the Bible would actually make important decisions based on things like that. When we make a decision, we like to consider all angles, weigh the alternatives, take everything into consideration, ponder about it, and then make what we consider the best choice. If I made an important decision by flipping the coin, people would think I was crazy. would consider it foolish. But people in the Bible saw it differently. They asked God to be behind the results, and then they flipped the coin or whatever they did, and it was seriously thought that God controlled the outcome. I've wondered over the past few weeks if we wouldn't be better off making our decisions that way. I really have. I've wondered that. Now, I'm not suggesting the next time you have an important decision to make, you pray to God and then flip a coin and then make a decision based on that. But it's an interesting idea. And it's certainly something to think about. Because in both the Old Testament and the New, we see people making very, very important decisions by doing just that.